Varying views about investment opportunities on the African continent as a whole. Over the years, different countries have faced challenges unique to them, creating uncertainty around the issue of foreign investment. To discuss this more broadly, I'm joined by Tshepo Ncube, who is the Absa Group's Head of Global Corporates in South Africa. Tshepo, a pleasure to have you on the program this afternoon. Now, as we begin to explore the opportunities for investment on the continent, I want us to start a bit closer to home. There is no question that the events that unfolded in South Africa in early July do paint the continent, or rather do not paint the continent in the best light. But it is important to understand that Africa remains one of the few remaining frontier markets where capital can generate significant investment returns for the patient investor. What's your observation in this regard?
So sure, good afternoon, Sansa, to your viewers as well. We sure do have our fair challenges. Even developed markets have their fair challenges. When I look at South Africa, there's been some opportunities even during lockdown, during 2020, where we had, the lockdowns. Heineken is an example. Tabled an offer to the local group Distel, valued at about 31 billion. Considering that the alcohol sector had faced headwinds and negative headlines, as you'd say, it will be forgiven in assuming that investors would have steered clear from local investment. Quite recently, Germany, the United States, the United Kingdom and France have invested about 130 billion with South Africa, aimed to speed up the shift away from coal. Air Liquide also concluded an acquisition of Sasol oxygen plant for 9 billion in South Africa. If I then take it to Africa, Cote d'Ivoire, we saw 100 million being invested for Coca-Cola facilities.
Yeah.
The list goes on. There's also been $3 billion by Talo into Kenya to develop upstream activities. Tanzania as well received about 455 million to finance construction. I can go on in terms of the list. In fact, technology analyst Maxim Bayan tracks venture capital on the continent and highlights that the first half of 2021, African technology startups raised about $1.3 billion in funding led by South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt and Kenya.
Let's expand on that sentiment, and I'm glad that you raised a bit of context, which is also very important. Now, the African growth story remains intact no matter what the headlines say. While it's easy for analysts to look at the recent social unrest in South Africa, or even the attempted assassination of Mali's interim president, or a military coup in Guinea, Africa is still not conducive to, or rather it is conducive to business, and it seems that the discussion is far more nuanced than the news headlines let on. What is that we need to know about the opportunities that lie on this continent?
There's so many opportunities. I mean, I just highlighted some of the deals that are being finalized. I mean, if I look at the fintechs, the technology sector, if I look at power as an example, I mean, there's so many renewable opportunities. The 130 billion that is coming to the country is really for power. If you look at Kenya as well, it's all about renewable energy. So there's a lot of opportunity. I look at agriculture as well. China has to feed about 800 million people in the future. So agriculture will definitely play a role in the African continent because of the arable land.
But in the same breath, across the continent, there is also a very real concern around the chronic shortage of infrastructure, such as water, as well as electricity, as we well know here in South Africa. Speak to us about the impact of this.
There's a huge impact, and I guess this is what actually makes the continent attractive to most investors. I'm told that with infrastructure challenges, it becomes cheaper to invest in South Africa, in Africa.
Yeah.
So that attracts a lot of investments, and we really need that to actually uplift our infrastructure in the continent.
But over the last 10 to 15 years, the domestic financial markets are developing, and country-specific data is also emerging in this regard. It is clear that each of the 54 African countries represent their own unique challenges as well as opportunities, as you've rightfully outlined. Countries like Egypt as well as Morocco are not necessarily front of mind when one talks about high-growth economies, but both have emerged from 2020 on the front foot and are doing some innovative things to grow their economies and also attract foreign direct investment. Tell us a bit more about this aspect.
So if you look at Africa, as you say, a decade ago, it was seen as a homogeneous frontier market. It suddenly dawned onto investors that Africa is not a homogeneous mass. Cultures, languages, investment opportunities vary considerably from country to country. There's been a lot of opportunities. I mean, if I look at Morocco and Egypt, I mean, one would have never thought there's so much that's happening there. If I look at some of the DFIs, they've actually moved to the likes of Morocco. I don't know if I touched on Egypt earlier on, in terms of the 300 million that's being invested by Orange. The intention is to increase technology as well as agriculture in the Egypt area.
But Tshepo, a nagging concern for those looking from outside into Africa is that their investment deficit creates a situation such as we are currently seeing in South Africa, where a shrinking corporate and a private tax base is expected to carry the burden of infrastructure and social programs. It is important that this narrative does not become the new norm, wouldn't you say?
I agree. I certainly agree. And this is where we need FDI. Well-established domestic financial and capital market sectors are key for sustained growth, economic growth in any country. In developing countries, we actually don't have such markets, and this presents critical challenges in terms of growth and stability. So the focus really is around making sure that we address some of the gaps, and we can only do so by attracting foreign direct investments into the African continent.
So as we wrap up, and you touched on this a bit earlier, the automotive sector was one of the big beneficiaries, with the likes of Mercedes as well as Ford investing significant new infrastructure, while Toyota South Africa is also committed to the production of alternate energy vehicles domestically. The alcohol industry has also faced some massive headwinds and negative headlines in the last 18 months, and one would be forgiven for assuming that investors would steer clear of a local investment here. Yet we see the likes of Heineken also tabling an offer for the local group Distel, which is currently valued at about 31 billion rand, as you said earlier. What do these kind of transactions reflect about South Africa and the potential for more investment? Clearly, South Africa is open for business.
South Africa is definitely open for business. Yes, like I said, there's challenges. There's no country that doesn't have its own challenges. I mean, we had Mozambique as well not so long ago with their own issues. South Africa is actually used as a gateway into sub-Saharan Africa. So there's definitely opportunities. I mean, our financial system as well is stable. We've got great infrastructure. There's no reason for an investor not to consider South Africa as attractive. Yes, there are issues. Yes, the current government is looking at addressing some of these challenges. In fact, they've gone ahead and started working on some of them to, make South Africa attractive, to make sure that we grow our economy.
Well, that was Tshepo Ncube, the head of Global Corporate South Africa at Absa Group, saying there that South Africa is open for business despite some of the negative headlines that one may see, which paint quite a gloomy picture of where the country is right now.